So today I have Kyle Jetsel with me today. We're going to just kind of hang out and talk. And I just wanted to kind of get together with you and discuss your story because you've got five boys and a girl, and you have written a book. You've got your own business going. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Kyle Jetsel. I was the happily married father of six kids up until October of 2021 when my wife of 30 years passed away suddenly on me. But we have been able to, through that tragedy, still continue to have a happy family. And it hadn't been without a lot of work, but to me, that's kind of the best work you can do, right? Is the work to make your family happy and keep them together and thriving. That's the best kind of work there is. So
Absolutely. And it's really fulfilling and rewarding. And it's the struggle sometimes is difficult, but it's well worth it. Hearing your story, when we touched base together on Facebook, I had reached out to a group and you had responded, and then I checked out some of your story, and uh I was just blown away by your love for your wife. And I would like to talk about that if you don't mind.
I'd love to. Yeah, that's if I don't focus on that, I focus on other stuff, and that's the better stuff to focus on. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was just when you were telling me about your story, you had included your wife, and I had thought, this was such a recent thing. But then you had told me October 2021. I was like, wow, the way you speak about your wife currently, it reminds me of the love that I have for my wife. And it just I'm kind of choking up a little bit now. But it reminds me of how sweet people can be, and how that love, it just is stronger than any bond there ever will be.
yeah, I think your name is Ricky, correct? Am I right
Correct.
on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
One of my son's name is Ricky, so I just wanted to make sure I was getting that right. Ricky, I'm with you, and I think a lot of times we as husbands and fathers tend to, and it's because our wives do it, I think, more than us, but we tend to focus so much on our kids that we kind of lose sight of, in my mind, who's even more important than our kids, right? And that's
Yeah.
our spouses. And my wife and my kids all know, just so you'll know, she didn't like it when I told them this, but I think she liked it in I'm not going to say I like it kind of a way, but I've always told my kids, listen, if I'm on a boat and the boat is going down and I can save your mom or all six of you, y'all are going to die because I'm saving your
Yeah.
mom. And and I think it's easy to fall into the trap of being so devoted to your kids that you don't focus on your spouse. But she and I both knew we became a team, and it was through the trials and tribulations we had struggled through with our kids that we kind of became bonded together so tightly that uh, everything, the whole world around us revolved around our team. My team, she and I.
Yeah.
And so whenever we made decisions or whenever we did something or whenever anything happened, it was about us coming together and using the power of her femininity and my masculinity to solve problems and, create joy and do whatever the kids needed us to do. But it all started with she and I together. The two of us are so much more powerful than either of us individually.
Yeah. I say that all the time. I tell people all the time because I hear one of the most common things that I hear about parenting is my kids come first. My kids come first. And in my world, my kids don't come first. I come first. I come first, mama comes next, and then the kids come. And because without our happiness, the kids can't really be happy. And so that's the way I kind of look at things. I've kind of looked at that way my whole life, but especially being a parent. I've got 21 years of parenting experience with children under the age of 18. And then I've seen on your Facebook, you have a child with autism. Is that right?
Yeah, I have one of my sons has severe autism. Yeah.
So my youngest has type 2 autism, and so we're autism dads. It is a struggle. My son is high functioning, and he's verbal and he's very smart. And so just looking at him when somebody first meets him, they don't think, oh, this kid's autistic, or they don't really think that there's anything wrong with him at all. And then, something, one of his behaviors will happen, and they'll be, oh, I get it. But sometimes we want people to treat him differently, but the same. We kind of think of it like we would like um, for him to for everyone to acknowledge that he is different while treating him the same, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I've got, I don't know if I've got two sons that are actually on the autism spectrum. My son, who's more severe, and he's pretty severe. He can say a few words now. He's 25, so he's a little bit older. And I have another son who is level three, we'll call him, which is like you discussed, like high functioning.
Right.
And so, my high functioning son has some mental disabilities, but he's also it's the social aspect of it is very difficult for him.
Yeah, it is. It that social aspect, no, but like people, we call them normies, such as myself. That some people just don't understand that you can be outwardly functioning, you can be as verbal as they come, but when it comes to communicating socially, it is very difficult to read faces. It's very difficult to read emotions outwardly, and body language. It's very difficult for them to read body language. And not only is it very difficult to read that stuff, but it's also very difficult to uh, exude um, body language or feeling or communication through body language and stuff like that. So, yeah, I feel so your story, like I said in the beginning, you've got six kids, and you and your wife had some difficulties with some behavioral issues and some defiance issues. I think one of the most common disorders with a large group of children is oppositional defiance disorder. Did you ever have any issues with that?
So my more severe son on the autism spectrum was diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder, which adds a layer of complexity to it. With a we call them typical children, right? So we've got
Neurotypical, yeah.
autism typical, and you say normie. It doesn't really matter to me what you call. But with my typical kids, when they were defiant, we could reason with them, help them understand how moving in certain directions is going to be good for them long term. When you have a son who's more severe on the autism spectrum and he's defiant, there's no reasoning. So you really can't approach it as a problem that can be solved. It has to be more of a challenge that you're going to have to work within this his world forever, right? It's not something that he's ever going to go, "Oh, I get what you're trying to do, Dad." He'll never do that, right? Because
Right.
he's got some wires that are crossed, and that's just not something he's going to be mentally capable of grasping. And so, my wife and I were very we we realized early on that there were going to be challenges, and we realized that sometimes it's not so much as solving the challenge with our kids as much as it was being as patient and loving as kind as we could through that challenge. Whether that challenge ever is solved or not is not as important as our approach to how we manage that situation. Because I loved how you said earlier, we were, I wrote it down, our happiness was more important than they couldn't be happy if we didn't have happiness ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So my wife and I realized early on, my wife was very feminine. She was the picture of femininity and kindness and love. And I was kind of the opposite early on, right? I was kind of aggressive, ambitious, all those things that people can label the opposite of beauty and femininity and kindness and love, right?
Yeah.
I motivated my kids by fear early on, right? Which I think we can all fall into that trap too. Um,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you.
yeah, but eventually we realized, and all my sons now are bigger than me, and I'm not a small man. I've got a 6'5" and a 6'2" and a 6'1" son that are 220 pounds of muscle, and so I realized early on that fear wasn't going to be the way to do it, but my wife and I also realized that we were creating the world that our kids grew up in. And if we were unhappy or frustrated or discouraged consistently, that would bleed into our kids and we
Yeah.
would get that back out. And so we really made it a point to say, okay, we're going to face challenges, we're going to face trials. Everybody does. It's not like we're going to try to avoid that because that's not how the world works. And so we thought, how can we together as a combined couple spew happiness and joy and kindness onto them, even as we face those difficulties. And if we could teach them that, if that's the one thing they learn from us as parents, is how do I be happy and how do I experience joy and how can I express kindness even when my world seems to be falling apart? Then we
Yeah.
knew we knew as they got out into the world, if that was their approach, they were gonna they were going to really do some wonderful things in this world. And I think that's really what all of us are trying to do with our kids is how do we raise them in a way where they can go out into the world and create joy and create happiness and
Yeah.
and serve people properly and like you said, fulfillment from serving others and being kind and being nice and creating that world, their own world apart from us. We knew that if we could bleed that into them consistently, or at least we felt like, kids are going to make their own choices eventually, but at least we could model that kind of behavior for them so that they're prepared for the world, which is a harsh place, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it is and that's the truth of it. The world is a very harsh place and it will eat at you if you let it. But if we all as people just take a moment to kind of remember who, like, if we're speaking to someone, that person is a person, just like us, and they have issues just like we do. And you were saying that that you knew that everybody has issues, and I think that's important to remember for everyone, that we all go through these issues, even like, so there's no perfect parent, there's no guideline to be a perfect parent. And I say it all the time, at the hospital when your kids are born, they just hand you the baby and say, here, try not to kill it, you know and
Right.
so you are in a situation where sometimes you don't really know what to do, especially if it's your first child. And you're exactly right. What we project in our daily lives, our kids are picking up on that. And if we show each other respect, love, and happiness and joy, if we show each other that in our marriages, that absolutely translates to our kids, you know? And I always say, and I spoke about this briefly with my last guest. I say, my job as a parent is to teach my kids how to live without me. And
Yeah.
part of that is how to be a productive member of society, how to be a person that people like to talk to versus people uh, don't like to talk to, I'm
Yeah.
right there with you.
That's a great point. You mentioned something I think is really a powerful thing for us to remember as parents, because I think sometimes I'm involved in a lot of autism groups, and some of them are for dads and some of them are for moms. And I actually run one where I have a few followers in that situation. But um, one of my favorite things that my wife taught me that I think is really been a powerful, we call them strategies, right? It wasn't enough for us to face a challenge as a family. We didn't want to just wait it out, right?
Yeah.
we wanted to create strategies so we'd have a plan to address this challenge in our lives. And sometimes that plan was flawed, and a lot of times that plan was flawed, and we'd have to make those adjustments, right? But even with plans, as human beings and as parents, because we're not perfect, we have a we work at something consistently, but then we fall off the wagon, right? We make mistakes, and way too many people, I think, they'll make a mistake as a parent, and they'll let the guilt or shame or anguish beat them down so bad that it prevents them from hopping back on that train and just running down that path that they know is going to be the most healthy. And my wife came up with a strategy she called 100% accountability and a whole lot of grace. That was the name of her strategy. And it's pretty self-descriptive when you think about it, right?
I love
When
it.
when she would make, let's say the kids are just, and remember, my wife comes from a world of femininity and beauty and kindness. And, initially we had these four crazy, feral, out of control, maniacal boys, right? And she would say, "Oh my God, what the heck is going on here?" Right? These guys are crazy. They won't do anything. They fight me on everything. It's like they're little animals running around with no right. And that's how little boys are a lot of times, right? I mean, it's just that's the reality of what these little guys are. And so she would eventually snap and scream at them, right? And that wasn't her nature. Her nature was the opposite of that. It was kindness, right? And love. And she would feel so bad. And when she came up with the strategy, I remember watching her kind of change, right? And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "I came up with a new strategy. I call it 100% accountability and a whole lot of grace." And what it means to her was that when she messed up, and she didn't beat herself up, and she didn't guilt herself into submission, and she didn't, let it knock her off the train of trying to do what was right. She said, "I'm going to take accountability for my mistake or how I messed up. And then I'm going to give myself a whole lot of grace because I'm not perfect and I never will be. And I'm going to hop back on the train and I'm going to keep trying." Right. And what it ended up doing is it made her happier because she didn't expect perfection as a parent. And she realized sometimes these boys are going to push her beyond to the edge and she's going to fall off the edge. Right. It doesn't mean she can't get back on almost immediately if she acknowledges those things and accepts the accountability. And I saw her start to change and just brighten more and more and more. And I was like, "What are you doing?" Right. And when she shared it with me, I thought, how fantastic is that? Because I know my wife was very susceptible to making making simple mistakes sometimes and letting guilt just beat her down, right? And
Yeah.
her emotions would become more important to her. And these are her words, by the way. I would never say this, but she told me one time, she said, "I realized when my emotions become more important to me than my love for the kids and you, that's a problem.
Yeah.
My
I
love for
love
you and
that.
the kids, my love for you and the kids has to be more important to me than my emotions." And so that whole 100% accountability and a whole lot of grace strategy helped her to recover from those mishaps because we're all going to have them, right? And we should
Yeah.
expect to have them. There are going to be times when we're exhausted or discouraged or frustrated or we had a tough day and the kids start banging on us, right? And that's when we will yell out at them or ground them for the rest of their lives. Whatever it is we do, right, as parents, that we all do it. We all know we all do it, right? But I thought that was a tremendous strategy for her to internalize. And the cool thing about it was her mistakes became less and less and less because she kept hopping back on that train and kept running down that path. And her goal ultimately, she said, was to, you can't fail if you never stop trying, right? And
Yeah.
so and so I'm going to do my very best, and then if I fall off, I'm going to hop back on, and then I got to let the chips fall where they may with my kids, right? At some point, your kids are going to get out into the world, and they're going to make their own mistakes, and if you let that be your core, it's gonna beat you up as a parent. So we've got to let them do that, but
Yeah.
also
Absolutely.
but also we want to be the very best parents we can be, and we want to consistently try to be the very best parents. But to expect perfection is a it's a trap that we've got to be very careful we don't fall into.
Yeah, when your wife, when you said your wife had said she came up with a strategy, 100% accountability and a whole lot of grace, that reminds me of some stuff that I do. I don't really have a name for it other than just being honest. When I make a mistake, especially a parenting mistake, I am honest. First of all, I'm honest with myself that I've made a mistake. And then I take the actionable steps to correct that mistake or ensure that it doesn't happen again. And the first step of that is accountability. And I oftentimes, even with my young one, even with my 5 year old who doesn't fully understand maybe some of the things that I'm talking about are some of the themes that are going on in my head. I just explaining how I feel in a moment or explaining, um, I don't want to be the bad guy. I
Yeah.
don't want to punish you. I want you to learn from this mistake and let's move forward. Oftentimes, I will uh, I will try the love and logic approach first, uh, and unless I get really irritated, like you were saying, unless I've gotten to that point, I try love and logic first because it helps them understand why. It helps them understand why we tell them to do things, and one of my favorite things that I do as a parent also is when a child asks me why, I try not to say things like because I said so.
Right.
Oh, and I try not to um I try not to say I try not to say things that would be closed end of the conversation. I try to say things that might make more questions ask. You know what I'm saying? I try not to tell them. I make sure to tell them why in a certain on certain things. So
Yeah. And I think you hit on something that we believe in our family, which is, and we've seen this. We've seen this in our family where kids respond. First of all, let me say this. When you're at a heightened emotional moment, and we all get there, that's really not the best time to make decisions anyway. It's really a
right,
bad idea. So it's never a bad idea to take a break away from those moments, and like you said, uh, compose yourself so that you can express love and logic, right? And that can be a tricky thing to do because a lot of times we want to address the situation in the moment, but always that sometimes that's a risk, right? But um, kids don't respond to discipline just because it's discipline, right? They what they do respond to, and we've seen this with all our kids, and now that I've worked with a lot of other parents, is kids respond to discipline when it's done in a spirit of love, right? If you love them and they know you love them, and you can express that in your discipline, they start to respond. I'll never forget when my oldest son said to me, you're just doing this because you want me to do what you say, right? And we're all going to hear that eventually. And I had an opportunity in that moment to say, listen, the reason I discipline you is so that you'll learn you can discipline yourself. I said, because when you leave our house, if you have no discipline, the world will discipline you, and the world doesn't love you. The world will beat the crap out of you. The world will throw your butt in jail with no mercy whatsoever. I said, so my job is to teach you, is to help you learn to discipline yourself. And sometimes I have to apply that so that you'll know you can discipline yourself, right? Because the last thing I want to do is just release you into the world with zero discipline. You'll be in jail in no time. You'll
it's
have
essentially
horrible
creating a problem for somebody else.
and you'll have
That's how I
horrible
look at it.
outcomes for the rest of your life. I don't discipline you because I want you to do what I say. I discipline you because I love you and I want you to have a good life once you leave, our family and our presences, because then you'll know you can discipline yourself and you'll go out there and you'll say, I can manage myself properly. I can manage my emotions. I can manage my thoughts and 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 create something good in the world. And so I think to imagine that, and again, we're all going to get it from our kids. Uh, Sometimes the why has to wait, right?
Right.
Sometimes because they may not be ready for those conversations, but I don't think it's a problem sharing those conversations as early as possible, whether it's a 3 year old or a 5 year old or I had one of my other sons who was a real challenge. Uh, the worst thing I could do to him was keep talking to him. He hated it, right? Yeah. Because he's like, okay, I got it, Dad. I said, well, yeah, I don't think you do
Yeah.
because you keep doing it. You keep doing it. So let's keep talking about it. And he was like, dude, just stop talking to me and I'll stop doing it. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But the whole point though is as early as we can. I love that you're having conversations with your 5-year-old. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because it also gives them consistency. Because when you talk to them about it at 5 and at 6 and at 10 and at 15 and at 17, you're being consistent, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
kids are looking for inconsistencies because they're smart. And if they see an inconsistency, they can claim hypocrisy, right? And they will use hypocrisy against you. Again, not because they're bad, because they're kids. That's what
Yeah.
they're supposed to do. Kids are supposed to figure out the world. And so they're supposed to see everything and absorb everything and figure out how it works, right? And so they're gonna test and tweak and try. My wife used to say kids are like velociraptors, right? I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Jurassic Park. Do you remember that movie?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of my
And
favorites.
they have the velociraptors in these walled off cages with electrified fences around the top, right? And the velociraptors, what are they doing? Systematically, every day, all day long, they're testing
Testing
the
those
fences
fences.
to see where there's a weak spot, right? And in the movie, what happens is he has to turn off the electricity for 30 seconds. I don't know how long, not long. And they are out. You know
Yeah.
why? Because because they're velociraptors. That's what they do. They're smart, they're creative, they're trying to figure out how to work the world. They want what they want. They don't, they don't understand the consequences of bad behavior, right? Neither do our kids. And so kids are going to test the fences consistently. If they find a weak spot, they're going to exploit it. They're going to try, not because they're bad, but because they're kids. That's what they're supposed to do. We got to help
Especially
them.
problem solvers,
Yeah,
problem
we got to
solving
help them.
children.
Yeah, they're going to figure it out, right? So the more consistent we can be, again, we're not trying to, my kids are many of my kids are strong-willed, and my wife and I decided we don't want to suppress their strong will because they're going to need it, right? We want to encourage challenging the world and challenging things and keep their strong will. We just want to aim it in the right direction, give them some guidelines. We don't want to capture them in a cage and force them to do what we want them to do. We want to release them from the cage, but we want to give them reasonable guidelines because that strong will and those strong spirits they have, if we can help them aim that in the right direction, they're going to do some crazy cool stuff in this world, right? But if we don't help them aim it, they're going to go out and kill everything like the velociraptors do, right? They're just going to go hog wild, and they're not really capable kids of seeing beyond tomorrow, right? I mean, and so because we have hopefully the gift of wisdom, and we can see beyond tomorrow, we have to help them, guide them. But again, I'm not saying kids are bad because none of my kids are bad, but they are strong-willed and they will challenge me on everything. And I've got a 30-year-old son now. He was over here last night and we were having a conversation. He says, I don't know about that, Dad. And I said, what's that? He said, I'm going to challenge you on that thought and where you're going with that. And I'm like, oh, I see what you're saying. I can see your approach to it, right? When your kids become adults and you can have these conversations that they challenge you or you challenge them, it's a great relationship to have. He's one of my best friends in the whole world, my 30-year-old son, right? And
Yeah.
and how great is that? That and he is so strong-willed, by the way. That kid put me through right all the kind of things that you'd expect a strong-willed kid to put you through, but to be able to aim them in the right direction so they can be out in the world making a difference and doing great things, and then come home and be and love on you and you love on them is a wonderful thing to have happen in your life. So
Yeah, absolutely. I like that approach. I like the saying, teach them how to think, not what to think. And that's the kind of approach that I like to take because I honestly don't know much myself. I'm new, like so I'm always take a new approach to things, even if I know how to do them. Let's just say I've done something a year ago and I'm going to do it again just today. Like after a year's time. I'm still going to take my time and make sure that I do that thing correctly, even if I've done it a million times. And that's teach them how to think, not what to think. And also, to touch on something you said there at the end, um, strong-willed is absolutely okay. And you have to, not only do you have to kind of help shape and mold that from an aspect of, teaching him how to think, but you also have to teach him, if you're always a hammer, everything's a nail, you know. And as far as, your kid being your best friend, as he's 30, that that makes me proud because I think of my children, my adult children now, as more of a, yes, I'm dad, but you can come to me like a friend too if you need to. If you need somebody to talk to, if you need somebody to bounce ideas off of, or if you need somebody to just be silly with, I'm your guy. And my bless them, my kids and I aren't that far apart in age. My oldest is 21 and I'm 39. So
Mm.
it's it's uh it's kind of weird. I am a grandpa now. My grandson was born 3 months ago, and my youngest son is 5, and so he and my grandson will be kind of growing up together. So that's kind of weird. But when my youngest's name is his Rocket, and like I said, he's got level 2 autism, and it's a difficult concept for him to understand that he's an uncle. And
Yeah.
so I tell him, we tell him, when the grandson's around, we say, Uncle Rocket, and he'll say, I'm not Uncle Rocket, I'm just Rocket.
Mm.
That's kind
Yeah.
of cute. But yeah, we have to teach our kids how to think, not what to think, because sometimes, we're often biased in our thinking one way or the other. And the way I believe, especially politically, has changed from the time I was 20 years old till now. And hell, the way I think politically has changed just in the last 10 years. So I I do realize that I am biased in some areas, and I want to impress upon my kids, hey, don't take my word for it. Find out for yourself. Look up this information, make sure what I'm telling you is the accurate truth. And in areas of research, what I've taught them to research is find at least 3 reputable sources that say the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you're doing too, I like that because what you're doing is it, it, you have to really wipe away your ego with your kids if you're, I've heard a lot of parents say, teach them how to think, not what to think. But the minute they start thinking something differently than their parents get a bent, right? And they say, well, you got no wisdom. I got all the wisdom. Well, do we really, any of us have any wisdom? I mean, come on. We, none of us have been here that long. You know what I'm saying?
We've all
But you're
got
right.
personal wisdom.
We all have personal wisdom, but that is personal wisdom. That's
Yeah.
our unique experience. And a lot of our beliefs are built on our unique one to one experience, right? And so it does require us to put our egos aside. And as men, that's one of our most prized possessions, right? Is our ego. And so for us to be able to set that aside and allow our kids to have different opinions and express them to us without getting upset about it or frustrated or, is a powerful thing. I agree with you. I think more important for my kids, I've taught them not 3, you say 3 reputable sources. I say understand that the, what the sources, um, it's important to understand why people report things the way they do, right? And
Yeah.
so, and so reputable, I don't even know, is there any reputable source anymore, right? Because everybody's got
In
an ulterior, well,
2024, you're absolutely right. No, there is
so,
not.
so many people and so many entities have ulterior motives, right? They're driven by, money or fame or, prosperity or whatever it is that they're driven by. And I think that's one of the things that my kids and I have talked about is, who, not just who is the source, but who's driving that source, right? And what are their ultimate goals here? Because it's easy to, I mean, I can find three reputable sources that say the earth is flat right now. Is the
Yeah,
earth
yeah.
flat? I don't believe it is, right? I mean, I'm just saying I don't personally believe it, but it's easy to find reputable sources for everything. The question is what's driving those sources because they're going to have their own slant on how the world works. And
Yeah.
so, and the other thing we have to be careful of too is there's a lot of the younger generation. When I was growing up, my dad used to say, be careful who you spend your time with because the five people you spend your time with, you're going to become just like them, right?
Yeah, I say that all
And
the time.
yeah, and that has changed the online world now. If you're into, uh, I don't know, save the seals, whatever. I don't know. I'm just going to make something up. And you're online always researching that. The algorithm is going to keep
Th
feeding you more and more of that same information, and it's going to wipe away anything that counteracts that thought, right? So
that's how
you're stuck.
echo chambers are
It's an
created.
echo
Yeah.
chamber, absolutely. And you're going to believe the whole world believes like you believe, and you're going to be shocked when there's a dissenting, right? We in our family we call it cognitive confirmation bias, right? And it basically says you have a set of beliefs and you're looking for information that supports your beliefs and you're going to deny any information that counteracts your belief, right? So be careful what you believe because you're going to get all kinds, you're going to find information that supports it and you're going to deny anything that goes against it. And so it's really, again, it's a great thing to be able to do as a parent is to absorb all kinds of information and allow your kids to do the same and say, a part of what we're doing is look at outcomes, test outcomes, see how those people that are believing that, are they happy? Are they joyful? Are they spreading love? Or are they spreading fear? Are they uplifting the world or are they tearing it down, right? Outcomes really are an important part of what we should be teaching our kids to watch for, even in their own situations, right? I had one son that didn't want to go to school. He didn't have any friends. And I said, well, why don't you think you have any friends? Well, everybody hates me. Well, everybody? Everybody? What are you doing? Because my suggestion is if everybody hates you, you're doing something to make everybody hate you. Everybody hates you. Everybody?
I
Really?
got
Everybody?
I stole a saying from a TV show, and I say this all the time. You wake up in the morning and you're going into work, you meet an asshole. Okay, maybe you've met an asshole. You wake up in the morning, you run into assholes all day, maybe you're the asshole.
At some point you gotta start turning your pointing your fingers back at yourself, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And my son, I said, maybe you're doing things that are off-putting. Try a different approach to things and see what your outcome. Pay attention to your own personal outcomes. Because if you're getting a lot of bad outcomes, you know, maybe you should put other stuff out into the market, right? Again,
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't be unique. I'm not saying don't be who you are, but I'm saying you get to choose who you are, right? You really do. So maybe you can go, and he was able to realize very quickly, the reason I'm getting these outcomes is because I don't shut my mouth sometimes when I shouldn't flap my lips at other kids, right? He was a big talker. And he learned pretty quickly, you know what, when I don't say so much stuff and or if I say different things, all of a sudden I got a lot of friends. There you go. Right now you're pleasant. People want to be around pleasant people. They don't want to be around people that talk crap all the time, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
really very simple to pay attention to your outcomes and pay attention to other people's outcomes. Watch, are they living happily? Are they living joyfully, right? Are they spreading goodness? Are they lifting people? If that's what you want in your life, I would pay attention to those people, be around those people, surround yourself with those people, and become one of those people, right? If you're, and that's not the choice of every kid. Some kids choose otherwise, and that's okay for them too, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
pay attention
I
to your
s-
outcomes.
I think with my children, I kind of said the same thing, but I'm a little less refined. So I have uh I have an eighth grade education, so I'm not very educated. I did get my GED when I was like 19, but again, that was 20 years ago. So I'm a little less refined in my approach, but same thing. You know, I'm right there with you. Like I do teach my children that it's important to listen. Active listening is very important. And that's something that I've had to learn a lot over the years, and especially being a podcast host. Active listening is very important. Like just during this interview, I've interrupted a couple times, but that's part of active listening in that I'm very interested in this conversation. I'm very invested in this conversation, and it's important to show the person that I'm talking to, since we're not across right directly across from each other, it's important to give those facial cues, those body cues that I am actively listening. And before, when I was younger, I would just talk, just to hear myself talk. Didn't care if who was listening. And then I would get the same result that where nobody wanted to kind of just be around. And I found that if I just stay quiet long enough to listen to what's already going on when I show up, I can interject myself with, hey, like icebreakers and stuff. I can think of like listening to the conversation that's already happening and finding out what it's about, relate to it, and then I can talk.
It's a great, you just described perfectly a great example of watching your outcomes, right? You realize very quick, and I'm the same way, by the way, Ricky. I can talk. I mean, you could sit me up in front of people, 200 people, and I could talk for 8 hours, no problem at all, right? I've got plenty to say. But you're right. It takes, you have to consciously say, listen, I got to quit. I got to quit listening so I can talk back. I need to listen to hear. And you'll see me occasionally look down. It's because I'm writing down things that you're saying that I want to specifically touch on. Yeah, and that's the way I do it, right? Because I've got this mind that's jumping from one subject to another very quickly.
Yeah, I've got
And when I
ADHD.
hear you cue me in on something, I'm like, oh, that's great, and I write it down. And you see, I've got a page of notes already, right? But the idea for me is if I know I'm listening, I can't necessarily be listening to respond as much as I'm listening to listen to what you have to say, and then maybe some feedback comes from it, right? But
Yeah.
anyway, I think it's a great example of that, and again, that comes from paying attention to your outcomes, right? I've known some people who, like us, just love to talk, and they think everybody loves them, but then nobody wants to be around them,
Yeah.
and they're like, I thought these people love me. Why don't they want to be around them? Well, sometimes you just don't shut up, I mean, give other people a chance to talk. And we got to pay attention to that. Otherwise we miss it and then we're lonely.
Yeah.
So
And I pick
I
up
love
on it.
that you got that. And it took me a while too. It took me a while to catch that, right? The engagement, my wife used to call it, she didn't particularly care for the word communication as much as she loved the word connection. And that
I
was
like
different
that.
to her, right? It meant that there was, because I can communicate at you for an hour and there be no connection. But if we connect somehow, if we find common ground, if we're discussing the same things in it, maybe even different approaches, maybe even alternate approaches to the same thing, there can still be that connection because you're listening to me, I'm listening to you, and we're kind of playing off each other's ideas. And so to me, when she presented that idea to me, I thought, wow, that's one thing I'm missing is connection, right? And
Yeah.
especially with her in a lot of cases is she'd be talking and I'd be listening to fire back because I grew up in kind of a rough neighborhood where, you know, I may appear refined, but believe me, I'm ghetto straight up. I am so I grew up in inner city Dallas in an area called Oak Cliff. And I mean, I tell people violence and the threat of violence was the most powerful tool I learned as a kid.
I'm with you.
And so that was my core growing up is you're either tough or you get abused in my world, right? And so everything I did was it was combat, right? And it didn't have to be necessarily physical combat, but it was mental combat. Is everything was just I'm the man, it was you get it. And not a lot of
Yeah.
people do, I think, right? And so when I first met my wife and she was so feminine and beautiful and kind and sweet, she kind of melted me, right? And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, what the heck is happening here? And I don't know what she saw in me, but she realized that she could. My wife used to say, it's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in the war, right?
Hey, yes.
She said, I want you to be a warrior, but I want you to be in the garden with me most of the time. And so I need you to be a warrior sometimes, but very, very rarely do I need you to be a warrior, right? Most of the time, I need you to be a gardener, but I like to know that the warrior's in there. That comforted her, but also, being in the garden, managing that part of our thought process allows us to connect better, right? I didn't connect with anybody as a kid. I mean, it was combat, right? That was off limits. But she really softened me and made and allowed me to start saying, you know what? Sometimes it's harder for me as a man to be soft and to just be passive and be kind and listen and respond in kind, and that was a challenge for her to present that to me because I wasn't having it initially. But over time, as I saw how I watched her outcomes and how people treated her and how she lived in her world, and I'm like, wow, she lives in a beautiful, kind, wonderful, sweet world. I live in this bitter, angry, violent, crazy world, and it's the same world. How is she living in this kind, beautiful, sweet, wonderful world, and I'm living in a violent, crazy, out of control world, and we're in the same world? What's the difference, right? The outcome. I said, "Oh, show me what you're doing. Help me understand. I still want to be a man. I still need to be a warrior sometimes. But most of the time, it's okay for me to be a gardener with you. Help me understand how to do that with my kids, with you, with everybody else. And I want to learn from your outcomes how to be able to connect in those ways and achieve that connection with people as opposed to just two individuals passing, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Yeah. Your wife said connection and she didn't like the word communication. That's good. I really like that. And the way, man, the way you talk about your wife, it's just like the way I think about my wife. It's and I'm a little emotional again. I just listening to the way you talk about your wife and the way the beauty that she saw in life and that she opened up in you, it reminds me a lot of my relationship with my wife. And so my wife is my editor. So she may not be in the room with us, but she's going to view this later. And sometimes I do talk to her through my guests. Sometimes I'll apologize for something I did 3 days ago through the show, and I'll acknowledge, hey, this happened the other day, and I wasn't thinking clearly. And, I give examples. And when you're talking about letting your wife know that you are there in how she taught you a different way to communicate with her, that you can love and still be strong. You can love and still be a man. And boy, that's really important because I felt every bit of that because I struggle. I've been a stay-at-home dad for the last 10 years. I don't have an income. And as a manly man, I grew up in this, it's not a terrible area. We're just about an hour north of Kansas City. So terrible areas aren't strange to me. I've been to terrible areas, but it's more like a quiet suburb of Kansas City. And so we're no stranger to um, like bad neighborhoods, violence, and stuff like that. And as a man, that's the world that I grew up in. And that's the only way I knew how to deal with conflict was violence or anger. It was very strange to me to have a partner as my wife and I got together. It was very strange to have a partner that wasn't combative.
right.
And my wife is not confrontational at all. And when she, and it like just in a random argument, when she like shuts down in a random argument, that kind of gives a person pause and be like, well, am I really, doing any good here? And then when you give a moment to settle down and you come back to the situation, you're like, hey, you realize over time that those kind of things, that's not the way to properly deal with those type of things. And but well, out in public though, like if I'm very I don't know how to it's not protective. I'm not sure what it is. Um to give a good example, we were at Walmart one time and I went off on a security guard because he disrespected my wife in front of me. Um I don't know how I'm not really sure how my wife feels about it, but I always make sure that she knows that when I'm around, she's protected. She's got protection, and it doesn't matter if she's right or wrong. I'm there with her.
Yeah, you reminded me of for our 25th anniversary. My wife and I were married for 30 years prior to her passing, and on our 25th anniversary, my wife had never been to Vegas. My wife kind of my wife kind of grew up in a suburb of Dallas, and she was very naive. My wife was very naive to the world, right? And we decided to go to Las Vegas for our 25th anniversary because she liked to watch people. And I said, that's the capital of people watching, right?
And I'm going to
And so,
interrupt you just for a
yeah,
second. My wife, literally a week ago, or 2 weeks ago now, she had spoke. She's just like telling me, I want to go to Vegas. And neither one of us gamble, neither one of us drink.
right.
So I'm like, what the hell do you want to go to Vegas for? And she's like, to people watch.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah. And we're the same way. Neither of us drink or gamble either. But there's so much to do and see and watch, right? And so, and my most vivid experience of that, we had a great time. We went and did everything, all the tourist stuff because it's tourist stuff because it's fun and it's
Yeah.
cool and it's weird and different, and I remember one evening we were walking back to our hotel and we took a shortcut. And let me just anybody that's never been to Vegas, don't take shortcuts in Vegas. Stay right on the strip because when you go off the strip, you see the damage that excess can do. And that city is a city of excess. Everything is over the top, right? And as we're walking down this kind of an alley, I mean, we saw everything that you would imagine you would see in a back alley in a city of excess, right? And I didn't realize it when we started walking down the alley. I didn't realize that's what it was. And by the time we realized that's what it was too late. And we just had to finish our walk. And she snuggled up real close to me and wrapped her arms, real tight next to me. And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't realize we would be in this environment. And she said, I'm not worried at all. You got it, right? And it and it and it that was when I know that in that moment, I thought, now is she sees the warrior in me, right? And she is unafraid. And when we got back to the hotel room, I said I was, a part of me even is when you're in those environments, even a part of you has fear, right? As a man, you have to address it properly. I'm not going to bolt and leave my wife there, right? But there's moments where you think, man, if I put us in a really bad situation, but that's when you have to just stand up taller and look like you are not a victim, right? I mean, growing up where I grew up, if you look like a victim, you were. If you didn't look like a victim, you weren't, right? So I could
Right.
go anywhere and do anything because I stood up tall and strong, and I people knew that guy's going to fight back, right? There, I'm not. This is not a passive character. This guy's got purpose, right? And it reminded me of how, I think, and I believe in divinity, right? I'll just I when you're faced with these difficult, fearful things, it's important for us to really, you know, find ourselves and stand up tall and say, this is something I'm going to have to face. And I've got some options here. I can be afraid and cower and let this overwhelm me and not be who I'm meant to be, or I can face it with strength and courage. And when my wife passed away, I remember it was very sudden. It was uh, she went to the hospital 10 days later. She was dead, and so I'm left here with 13-year-old twins, one little girl who's 13 years old with her twin brother, and I'm thinking, oh, geez, Louise, we've worked so hard as a family to create a world of happiness and joy and love and kindness. I don't want this to fall apart. And yeah, my wife is gone, but I'm still here.
Yeah.
And I've got my responsibility just tripled, right? Because not only do I have all these kids, I've still got to be a good father too, but I got this little girl, this 13-year-old little girl that has just lost her mom, the most beautiful, feminine, wonderful woman I've ever met, right? And so in that moment, it can be easy to fall apart, very easy to fall apart. But I thought I can't. I just didn't feel like I had that luxury. It couldn't be about me in this moment, right? And I mean, I sat down and I went to work and I drafted a plan and I read books about kids losing their parents and how do they manage. And I mean, I went to work and I feel very blessed that I was able to find information and that would help me to help my daughter. And I've been amazed to watch her just grow through this and realize that, I mean, I read one article that said, I think more than half of our US presidents and people of high stature all lost a parent at a young age. And I'm like, well, how is that possible? Well, and the theory was that the worst possible thing that could happen happened. What else do I have to fear? You know what I'm saying? And I thought,
Yeah.
wow, that's an interesting look at it because that reframes it in a way that allows you to succeed or to move forward with confidence. And so, even this past week, years later, almost 3 years later, my daughter and I, once a month, we go out and have dinner together, just the two of us, and we talk about hard things. We talk about missing mom, and we talk about struggles and challenges that you have as a you know 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old girl, right? And I feel so grateful that my wife allowed me and taught me how to connect with her in a way that allows me to really kind of connect with my daughter as well. I'll never be able to replace my wife for sure, but certainly my daughter feels free to open up to me and talk to me about her challenges and struggles, and when she's willing to, allows me to counsel her, right? And say, what do you think your mom would say or your mom would do, or how do you think we should approach this, right? And she's become a problem solver, and I've watched her excel and succeed, and all my kids have been able to do that. And I think it's just because of the foundation that she built in our family. The connection we have with each other is so strong that we're okay with coming to each other in those moments of tragedy or trial or fear, right? Because those are real. Let's not
Yeah.
let's all be real here. We feel fear. We're going to feel fear. We're going to feel guilt. We're going to feel shame. We're going to feel anger. All those emotions are real, and we're going to feel them. The question is, what do we do with them in those moments, right? Do we let them overwhelm us, or do we take some time and figure some things out and try to move forward? And so, that's I feel grateful that a lot of I feel grateful I had her for 30 years and established some beautiful things that we can stand on now that she's gone. So
I wow. You're so you said your daughter's part of a twin set.
yeah,
So and they're your youngest.
they're our youngest. Yeah.
I'm looking at your a picture of your beautiful family and oh, you got five boys and a girl and it's a beautiful thing that your wife taught you how to love in that way. And man, that's beautiful. I've my daughter is the oldest, and I didn't meet her until she was 5.
Hmm.
And her and I don't have the closest relationship. And I always tell her that I don't know how to be a girl dad.
Mm.
I only know how to be a dad. And I know through my experiences and watching, like my wife and I have been together for 18 years. And so I learned how to treat my daughter from my wife.
Right.
And that's it's a very beautiful. You take your daughter out for dinner, and you have that connection with her. And man, that's again listening to you talk about your wife. It reminds me a lot of my wife and my situation here. We don't have 6 kids. We've got 4, and we have 2 together, and we've got 3 boys, and our oldest is a girl. And it is challenging to be a boy dad, even though I am a boy. Let me tell you, my bathroom smells awful all the time. It's horrible sometimes. And but I tell you what though, my favorite thing about my life is being a parent. I'm like, so I've been a stay-at-home dad for the last 10 years. That's all I know, really. I remember working my working career. I remember how bad it sucked and going to work. And I worked underground construction. So it's hard work. I remember that. But it's very, could I ever go back to that? No. And so as I built my business and I'm building this podcast, dad is in the name, you know, um, that's, I live to be a dad. And you have written a book and you've created a career based on being a parent, and you and your wife built up this legacy of the book and raising your children. I'm very proud of you as a fellow dad. I don't know if I've got the intestinal fortitude to do what you've done, especially with 5 boys. And with your daughter on the, I mean, you've got twins. Your twins are the youngest, but with your daughter being, we can call her the youngest for the sake of argument. With your daughter being the youngest, it's I bet it was a challenge to try to remain uh a strong person in the presence of your daughter, like without melting, you know.
You know, I was, there were times where, right after my wife passed away, I'll say in the first couple of months, it was interesting because my daughter was 13 when she passed away. And my daughter seemed unfazed, right? She
Yeah.
seemed unfazed. And it worried me, because I paid attention. If she disappeared for more than an hour at a time, I was on it, right? Because I had read enough and learned enough to know that isolation was not good, right? But I see my wife and my daughter so frequently, and I think it's funny you talk about that because my wife and I had 4 sons, and we stopped having kids for 6 years. Um, and my wife, I remember after the fourth son, I could tell my wife was disappointed because my wife wanted to pass down her femininity.
Yeah.
She wanted a daughter because she wanted that to be passed down to the next generation. And after we had our fourth son, I could tell my wife was disappointed. And she said to me, maybe we're just supposed to have boys, is what she said. Right. Well, 6 years later, my wife came to me with tears in her eyes and she said, I think we're supposed to try one more time for a girl. And she said, can we, can we think about that? Can we talk about that? Can we pray about that? And I said, absolutely. I mean, when my wife came to me with tears in her eyes, she rarely did that, but I knew that that was on her mind and it was something that was weighing heavy. And so we decided to try one more time, and we did get our twins, but one of them is a boy and one is a girl, right? But we were
Isn't
able to
that
get
par for the course though?
that's par for the course. And my wife was a little older at the time too, so I think that is part of, you have, as you get older, you're more susceptible to having twins. But and after my wife passed away, I kept feeling it's funny that so many things happened that my daughter was old enough where she would go in and just grab my wife's stuff and just wear it, or just, and she was, and if it were, I couldn't even go in my room hardly after my wife passed away. I couldn't even go in her closet because everything was, I mean, my bedroom was pink, you know? I mean, as silly as that sounds, it's hard to face that, right? But not my daughter. I mean, I remember one Sunday morning, my daughter came downstairs wearing my wife's pearls, right? I had bought her some pearls years ago, and I fell apart. And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know it would affect you like that. I'll go take them off." And I said, "No, don't take them
No.
off." Yeah. I said, "I love that you love to do that, but you're going to have to be patient with me sometime, right? Because it's still pretty raw for me, you know?" Well, a couple months after she passed away, I kept feeling my wife's presence in a lot of different places, and it was overwhelming. Her presence was overwhelming multiple times. And every time I would feel my wife's presence, my daughter would show up, right? And I was like, I wonder if, I believe my wife still communicates with me and connects with me in different ways, right? I'll have a dream about her, or I'll see something that reminds me of her. And I like that. I like to feel her presence as often as possible. But in this case, it was just overwhelming how often and how it was happening so frequently. And then every time my daughter would show up. And it's funny because I was walking by her room one morning and I look in and she was spritzing some perfume on. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. I said, where'd you get that perfume? She said, it's mom's. I said, you've been killing me here. Every time I keep smelling my wife, but it's you. And I realized in that moment what was happening is that I was getting a waft of my wife's perfume, and then my daughter would show up, and I wasn't making that connection. But it made me so happy, and I still felt like it was my wife's presence. And now when I look at my daughter and see the things she does and how she behaves, she's so much like my wife, and I'm so grateful that my daughter got to be raised to the age of 13 prior to her mom passing away, right? Because she was old enough to know exactly who her mom was, and the very unique and individual details of my wife were bred into my daughter.
Yeah.
I remember the first time she went on a friend date with a bunch of friends. Right, she had turned 16 and she was going to go running around with a bunch of guys and girls now. Right, and so I sat her down and I said, we probably ought to talk about, you know, appropriate, not appropriate details, all these different things. And by the way, not comfortable for a dad to do with his daughter, right? Not comfortable at all. And as I started talking to her and sharing her, some of our standards that we have, morality and chastity and all these different things, she said, well, I already know this, Dad. I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, me and Mom made a list a couple of years ago. And I said, what? Can I see the list? She said, yeah. She went and got it. And she had everything we were discussing plus 100 other things. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Oh, I was like, thank goodness. I was so relieved.
Check that off my list.
I was so relieved. And it made me really appreciate that my wife was not just raising her, but she was raising her.
Yeah.
She was. I've got a vivid memory of my daughter in the kitchen with my wife on a stool, baking at age 5, and just filling the house with wonderful smells. And my daughter, she taught my daughter to sew when she was probably 7 or 8, and now my daughter will go to thrift stores and buy stuff, 5 different items, and tear it all apart and make something new. And my daughter does all these things that are just my wife, and to know that my wife wasn't just, default raising my daughter. She was really raising my daughter And a big part of that was just modeling that behavior, but also engaging her and connecting with her in all those activities that made my wife such a beautiful, kind, and wonderful and sweet person, you know? And I will share one thing with you that I think, you know, as you were talking about how it makes you feel about your wife, that I was, I remember one night, my wife and I, we would sit in bed and we would talk about our kids and what was happening and what we should be concerned with and discussing some of the details of our lives. And we would sit there in bed and talk about those things because it mattered to both of us, right? I mean, you said it, being a dad is the greatest, right? And we were talking about it and she got a little teary eyed. And this is after 20 years of marriage, right? We'd already been married 20 years. We had all these kids. And I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, "But I just realized something." I said, "What did you just realize?" And she said, "You really love me." And I thought, "What?" How? But I didn't say anything in that moment, right? I just kind of got quiet. But what passed through my mind was, how could you not know
Yeah.
until this moment? And I spent the next couple of days thinking about this. We got 6 kids together. I've been faithful and I've done everything that I mean I try hard to be a good husband. You know, I try to treat her like a queen. I mean, how could it take you 20 years to finally know? And then I realized, you know what? I don't even care. What I do know is I'm so grateful she now knows,
I want to live
right?
in this moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and what it did for me is it made me realize that as close as we had become and as wonderful as a relationship as we were building, there was some doubt in there, even after 20 years, right? And it made me realize that even my own wife, the person I was closest to in this world, this intimate relationship, she had these things floating around that I was so grateful were not floating around anymore, right?
Yeah.
She absolutely, totally knew. And it took 20 years, Ricky, which I don't know about other relationships, but I assume if it took her 20, it might take other women 20 or 15 or 25 or 50. I don't know, right? I don't I don't know, but I know that she knew in that moment of my deep devotion, right? And that gives me comfort too now. Now that she's gone, I had a buddy of mine call me and say, "You know what, Kyle, I got to tell you something." I said, "What?" He said, "I don't know what I'd do without my wife." And it's you've made me seeing what's happened to you has made me check myself because your wife knows. She knew when she passed away how much you loved her. She knew without a shadow of a doubt. And I'm not sure my wife knows that. And he said, I've got to do a better job of making sure that my wife knows deep down in her core. And I think it at the time I didn't like hearing that, right? Because it was still raw. But in retrospect, I realized that if that could be helpful to him, maybe he dug in a little deeper. That makes it a little bit better. It makes me feel like at least my loss is helping others somehow increase their relationship with their wife, their love for their wife, or whatever it does for them. That's the reason I do these podcasts now more than anything, Ricky, is to is to say, hey, if I've got to suffer, and I've suffered, I mean, I have suffered, then somebody else ought to get something good out of it, right? Maybe not me, but maybe I can share some information or something that will help another couple just become closer and maybe feel a little bit of what my wife and I felt. And so that's been my desire ever since then is like, I'm my goal and my mission is to see other couples and other families love like we love and have loved. And if I can do that, then I know the world's going to be a better place. Just one couple, one family at a time. That's all I really want to see because I know what it's done for our family and I really want other people to experience that because I know how it makes us feel as a family. That's become my mission, Ricky.
Damn, Kyle, you got me over here crying, man.
Sorry about that,
I'm
Ricky.
telling. Oh, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. I know as dudes, we're always told, hey, don't cry, but
Yeah,
hey, that's what makes me a man, honestly. I I'm not afraid to show my emotions, especially, I mean, that's what the podcast is for. And man, you are really your story is incredible, and I can't thank you enough for keeping your wife's memory alive and sharing that story with us. I'm blown away, man. I as you were talking about that night laying in bed with your wife after 20 years, man, my wife and I have been together almost 20. I don't know, you know, I don't know. And that's going to be my mission now, is to
I love it.
make sure that she knows, make sure that I know, and make sure that my kids know. And man, this has been a great conversation, Kyle. I appreciate it. I
Thank you,
know,
Ricky.
just two dudes sitting here talking and crying, and I tell you what, man, this has been one of my favorite shows, and
Ricky, I'm
and
excited to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, Ricky. It's been great for me too. I've got a page of notes and I got some work to do myself. So I appreciate you chatting with me and sharing your experience as well.
awesome. And I tell you what, I'll reach back out to you again, and we'll get together and we'll talk more about your business and your book and what, Kyle. It's been a pleasure, and man, I'm speechless. It's been a good one. Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
Ricky.
man.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ricky.